A chance encounter. The glow of the city lights cast a warm, golden hue across the bustling streets of downtown. James Prescott, a man accustomed to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions, loosened his silk tie as he stepped out of the towering Prescott Global headquarters. He had just closed another multi-million-dollar deal, securing his company's dominance in the real estate market. The world saw him as a symbol of success, sharp, relentless, untouchable. But tonight, something gnawed at him, an emptiness that even his towering achievements couldn't fill. The weight of polished mahogany desks and high-rise views seemed heavier than usual. Instead of summoning his driver, James made a rare decision. He would walk. The city hummed with life, couples laughing as they strolled arm in arm, street performers captivating small crowds, and the aroma of freshly baked bread wafting from a corner bakery. James moved through it all like a ghost, his polished leather shoes tapping against the pavement. Ahead, the entrance to Lincoln Park came into view, its wrought iron gates slightly ajar. James rarely ventured into the park. His world was one of skyscrapers and luxury penthouses, not leafy paths and wooden benches. But tonight, curiosity pulled him in. The air was cooler beneath the canopy of trees. The distant sound of traffic faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of crickets. James walked aimlessly, his thoughts swirling with memories he usually kept buried. His father's stern lectures about success, his mother's gentle reminders about kindness. A sudden movement caught his attention. Beneath a flickering streetlight, a small figure lay curled up on a weathered park bench. James paused, his brow furrowing. It was a boy, no older than 10 or 11, his knees drawn to his chest and a tattered backpack clutched against him like a shield. The boy's thin frame shivered against the chill of the evening air. His clothes were worn and frayed, his sneakers scuffed and too small for his feet. James felt a pang of unease. He had seen plenty of poverty from afar, on the news, in reports from his charitable foundation. But this was different. This was right in front of him. He took a cautious step closer. "Hey," he called softly, his voice low to avoid startling the boy. The boy stirred, his eyes flickering open. They were wide and dark, filled with a mix of fear and defiance. He scrambled to sit up, clutching his backpack tighter. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I'll leave. I didn't mean to bother anyone." James held up a hand. "It's okay. You're not bothering anyone." He crouched to the boy's level, his tailored suit feeling out of place against the gritty park bench. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated, his gaze darting around as if searching for an escape route. "Elijah," he finally muttered. "Elijah," James repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "What are you doing out here, Elijah? Where's your family?" The boy's expression hardened. "I'm fine," he said defensively. "I don't need help." James recognized the bravado. It was the same tone he used in boardrooms to mask uncertainty. But Elijah's attempt at toughness only made him look more fragile. "Sleeping on a park bench doesn't look fine to me," James said gently. Elijah's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. "I don't have anywhere else to go," he admitted quietly. James felt a knot tighten in his chest. He wanted to press for more details, to understand how a child ended up alone in a city park at night, but he knew better than to push too hard. Trust was earned, not demanded. "Are you hungry?" James asked instead. Elijah's eyes flickered with hesitation. "Maybe a little," he admitted, though his thin frame suggested otherwise. James stood and extended a hand. "Come on. Let's get you something to eat." Elijah stared at the outstretched hand, as if it were a lifeline he wasn't sure he could trust. After a long moment, he reached out and took it. As they walked back toward the city streets, James couldn't help but wonder how many other kids like Elijah were out there, hidden in the shadows of his world of wealth and privilege. For the first time in a long time, James Prescott felt the stirrings of something he had almost forgotten: compassion. Tonight, Business as usual would have to wait. A meal and a glimpse into the past. The bright neon lights of Mel's diner flickered against the night sky, casting a warm glow onto the street. James pushed open the glass door, the cheerful jingle of a bell announcing their arrival. The air was thick with the scent of sizzling bacon and freshly brewed coffee. Booths lined the walls, filled with customers chatting over plates piled high with comfort food. Elijah's eyes widened as he took in the scene. It was clear he hadn't been inside a place like this in a while, if ever. His hand lingered on the strap of his worn backpack, as though afraid it might be taken from him. "Pick a seat," James said, gesturing to an empty booth by the window. Elijah slid into the booth hesitantly, his small frame nearly disappearing into the cushioned seat. James followed, setting his leather briefcase on the floor. A waitress with a kind smile approached, her notepad in hand. Her name tag read Linda. "Evening, folks. What can I get ya?" James glanced at Elijah. "Order whatever you want." Elijah's brow furrowed. "Anything. Anything," James confirmed with a nod. Elijah's gaze flicked between the menu and James, as if waiting for the catch. When none came, he cleared his throat. "A cheeseburger, with fries, and a chocolate milkshake." Linda jotted it down with a grin. "Good choice, kid. And for you, sir?" "Just coffee for me," James said. Linda disappeared into the kitchen, leaving them in an awkward silence. Elijah fidgeted with the edge of his menu, avoiding James's gaze. "So," James began, "how long have you been on your own?" Elijah shrugged, his expression guarded. "A few months, I guess." "What happened to your family?" The boy's jaw tightened. "My mom. She got sick. Real sick. She tried to keep working, but it was too much. After she died, I went to stay with my uncle." James's chest tightened. "And your uncle?" Elijah looked away, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He didn't want me around. Said I was too much trouble." James clenched his fists under the table. The idea of anyone abandoning a child, especially one as young and resilient as Elijah, was unfathomable. Linda returned with Elijah's food, placing the steaming plate and tall milkshake in front of him. "Enjoy, sweetheart." Elijah's eyes lit up at the sight of the food. He muttered a quick thank you before diving in, his hunger evident in every bite. James watched in silence, his mind racing. "You been going to school?" James asked after a while. Elijah shook his head between bites. "Tried, but they kicked me out. Said I needed an address." "No address, no school." James felt a surge of frustration. The system was supposed to protect kids like Elijah, but it seemed to have done the opposite. "You're a smart kid," James said. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Elijah looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Thanks," he said quietly. They finished the meal in relative silence. James paid the bill, leaving a generous tip for Linda. As they stepped back out into the cool night air, Elijah clutched his backpack tightly, his gaze darting around nervously. "You got somewhere to stay tonight?" James asked. Elijah hesitated, then shook his head. "The park's fine." "No, it's not," James said firmly. He thought for a moment, then made a decision. "You're coming with me." Elijah's eyes widened. "Why?" "Because no kid should be sleeping on a park bench," James said simply. They walked in silence toward James's penthouse, the city lights shimmering around them. Elijah kept glancing at James as if trying to figure him out. "You some kind of cop or something?" Elijah asked skeptically. James chuckled. "No, just a guy who doesn't like seeing kids left out in the cold." Elijah frowned. "Why do you care anyway?" James paused, his expression softening. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when people look the other way. I'm not one of those people." They reached the towering glass building that housed James's penthouse. The doorman greeted James with a respectful nod, his eyes flickering with curiosity at Elijah's presence. "Evening, Mr. Prescott." "Evening, Roger," The elevator ride to the top floor was quiet, tension hanging in the air. Elijah shifted uncomfortably, clearly overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding him. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped into James's sprawling penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Modern furniture and abstract art filled the space, everything pristine and meticulously arranged. "This place is huge," Elijah whispered. "Come on," James said, leading him down a hallway. He opened the door to a guest bedroom. The bed was neatly made with crisp white sheets, and a soft rug covered the hardwood floor. "You can stay here tonight," James said. "Bathrooms through that door. Get some rest." Elijah stood frozen in the doorway, his expression a mix of awe and disbelief. "This is for me." "For now," James said. Elijah set his backpack down slowly, as if afraid the room might disappear if he moved too quickly. "Thanks," he murmured. James nodded. "Good night, Elijah." As he left the room, James couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was just the beginning of something much bigger. Elijah's story was one of countless untold tales in a city that often turned a blind eye to suffering. But James wasn't going to look away. Not this time. Breaking down the walls. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of James's penthouse, casting warm golden hues across the sleek modern decor. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of warm croissants, filling the air. James stood by the kitchen island, sipping from a ceramic mug as he scrolled through emails on his tablet. He hadn't slept much. His mind kept circling back to Elijah, the boy curled up on a park bench with a backpack that seemed to hold his entire life. A shuffling sound broke through James's thoughts. He looked up to see Elijah standing hesitantly in the hallway, his eyes wide as he took in the expansive living space. His hair was messy from sleep, and the oversized guest room pajamas James had given him the night before hung loosely on his small frame. "Morning," James greeted with a nod. Elijah scratched the back of his head. "Oh, morning. You hungry?" Elijah's gaze flicked to the platter of croissants and fresh fruit on the counter. He shrugged nonchalantly, but his eyes betrayed his interest. "Go ahead," James said, gesturing to the food. Elijah approached cautiously, as if the spread might vanish if he moved too quickly. He grabbed a croissant and took a tentative bite, his expression shifting from guarded to surprised delight. "These are good," he mumbled through a mouthful. James chuckled. "Glad you approve." They ate in relative silence, the city skyline stretching out before them through the windows. James wanted to ask Elijah more about his past, but he knew better than to push too soon. Trust took time. After breakfast, James set down his mug. "What do you say we get you cleaned up? There's a shower in the guest bathroom, and I'll find you some clothes that fit better." Elijah looked down at the baggy pajamas. "Yeah, that'd be good." An hour later, Elijah emerged from the bathroom, his hair damp and freshly combed. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans James had found in storage, leftovers from a donation project his company had sponsored. The clothes were a little big but far better than the threadbare outfit Elijah had worn the night before. "You clean up well," James said with a smile. Elijah shrugged, clearly unused to compliments. "Thanks, I guess." James leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "So, what's the plan, Elijah? You can't keep living in parks. That's no way for a kid to grow up." Elijah's expression hardened. "I've been doing fine on my own." "Have you?" James challenged gently. "Sleeping on benches, dodging trouble, and skipping school. That's not fine, Elijah. You deserve better." Elijah's jaw tightened. "It's not like I have a choice. Nobody wants me. My uncle made that pretty clear." James felt a pang of anger at the thought of a grown man turning his back on a child. "Your uncle's wrong," he said firmly. "You're worth more than that." Elijah looked away, his tough exterior cracking just a bit. "Why do you care anyway?" James exhaled slowly. "Because I've seen what happens when people stop caring. And because I was lucky enough to have someone who didn't give up on me when I was a kid." Elijah's brow furrowed. You? But you're rich and important. James chuckled softly. I wasn't always. My dad walked out when I was little, and my mom worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. We had some rough times. There was this one teacher, though, Mr. Harris. He saw something in me when I didn't see it in myself. He kept pushing me to dream bigger, work harder. I wouldn't be here without him. Elijah's expression softened, the walls he built around himself beginning to crumble. Must have been nice, he said quietly. James nodded. It was. And now, I want to be that person for someone else. The room fell into a contemplative silence. What do you want to do, Elijah? James asked gently. If you could do anything, be anything, what would it be? Elijah's eyes lit up with a spark of passion he hadn't shown before. I like drawing, he admitted. I used to diddle all the time in class. My mom said I was pretty good. Art, huh? James said thoughtfully. That's a talent worth nurturing. Elijah shrugged. Doesn't matter now. Can't go to art school without money. James's lips curved into a determined smile. Let's not jump to conclusions. We'll figure something out. Elijah looked at him skeptically. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. James met his gaze steadily. Sometimes life puts people in your path for a reason. Maybe you're part of my path, Elijah. The boy didn't respond, but his expression softened further, a flicker of hope replacing the doubt in his eyes. Come on, James said, grabbing his keys. Let's go for a ride. Where? Elijah asked warily. You'll see. They took the elevator down to the garage, where James's sleek black SUV awaited. Elijah's eyes widened at the sight of the vehicle. Nice car, he muttered. Thanks, James said with a grin. Hop in. As they drove through the city, James pointed out landmarks and shared stories about his early days in real estate. Elijah listened intently, occasionally asking questions. Eventually, they pulled up to a large community center with vibrant murals painted across its walls. Kids of all ages played basketball on the outdoor court, while others worked on art projects inside. What is this place? Elijah asked as they got out of the car. A place where kids can be kids, James said, and maybe a place where you can find your spark again. Elijah looked skeptical but intrigued. As they walked inside, the hum of creativity filled the air. James led Elijah to a room filled with easels, paints, and drawing supplies. A group of kids was engrossed in their work, guided by a kind-looking art teacher. Elijah's eyes lit up at the sight of the art supplies. You think you'd like it here? James asked. Elijah nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe. James smiled. Good. Let's get you started. As Elijah picked up a pencil and began sketching, James watched with a sense of satisfaction. The boy had talent, raw and unrefined, but full of potential. This was just the beginning. The spark of change. The rhythmic scratch of Elijah's pencil filled the art room as sunlight streamed through the wide windows. James stood quietly at the back, watching the boy hunched over a sketchpad, completely absorbed in his work. The other kids had come and gone, but Elijah remained, his focus unwavering. It had only been an hour, but James could already see something shifting in the boy, like a tightly wound spring finally releasing. The art teacher, a gentle woman with curly silver hair named Mrs. Donahue, approached James with a warm smile. He's got a natural talent, she whispered, nodding toward Elijah. Raw, but impressive. What's his story? James's lips pressed into a thin line. It's complicated. Let's just say he hasn't had it easy. Mrs. Donahue's eyes softened. Well, he's welcome here anytime. Art has a way of healing wounds you can't see. James nodded, appreciating her understanding. As Mrs. Donahue moved to help another student, James walked over to Elijah, who was shading the intricate lines of the cityscape. That's impressive, James said, genuinely amazed. Elijah glanced up, his expression cautious. It's just a sketch. Maybe, but it's a good one, James insisted. "You've got talent, Elijah." Elijah shrugged, but James noticed the flicker of pride in his eyes. "Ready to head out?" James asked gently. Elijah hesitated, then nodded. He carefully tore the page from the sketchbook, folded it neatly, and tucked it into his pocket. As they walked back to the car, Elijah's steps seemed lighter. The weight he carried on his shoulders wasn't gone, but it had shifted ever so slightly. "You hungry?" James asked as they pulled out of the community center parking lot. Elijah's stomach growled loudly, answering for him. James chuckled. "I'll take that as a yes. How about some pizza?" Elijah's face lit up. "Really? I love pizza." "Good. I know just the place." A slice of normalcy. The pizza joint was a cozy, family-owned spot tucked away on a quiet street corner. The scent of garlic and melted cheese wafted through the air as they entered. Red and white checkered tablecloths covered the tables, and a jukebox played soft rock classics in the background. James and Elijah found a booth near the window. The waitress, a cheerful woman with freckles and a ponytail, handed them menus. "I'll take a large pepperoni," James said. "What about you, Elijah?" Elijah grinned. "Same, and maybe some garlic bread." "Coming right up," the waitress said with a wink. As they waited for their food, James leaned back in his seat. "So what did you think of the community center?" Elijah shrugged, though there was a hint of excitement in his voice. "It was cool, I guess. I've never seen so many art supplies in one place." "You seemed right at home," James observed. Elijah's expression grew thoughtful. It felt good. Like, I wasn't just some kid nobody cared about, you know. James's chest tightened. "You're not, Elijah. And I'm going to prove that to you." Elijah looked down at the table, fidgeting with the edge of his napkin. "Why are you being so nice to me? People don't just do that for no reason." James sighed. "I told you before. I had someone who believed in me when I was your age. I want to pay it forward." Elijah studied him for a moment. "You really mean that, don't you?" "I do," James said firmly. "And I'm not going anywhere." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their pizza, golden and bubbling with cheese. Elijah's eyes widened at the size of the slices. "Dig in," James encouraged. Elijah didn't need to be told twice. He devoured the first slice with gusto, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "This is the best pizza I've ever had," he declared between bites. James chuckled. "Told you it was good." They ate in comfortable silence, the weight of the world momentarily lifted. For the first time in a long while, Elijah looked like a regular kid enjoying a simple meal, a night of reflection. Later that evening, back at the penthouse, Elijah stood by the window, staring out at the glittering city lights. James watched him from the doorway, sensing the boy's thoughts were heavy. "What's on your mind?" James asked, joining him. Elijah hesitated before speaking. "I keep waiting for this to end, you know. Like any minute now, you're gonna tell me I have to leave." James's heart ached at the boy's admission. "That's not going to happen, Elijah." Elijah's voice wavered. "People always leave." James placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'm not people, and I'm here for as long as you need me." Elijah swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "Thanks, James." "You're welcome." As the city hummed below them, James knew that this was just the beginning. Elijah's journey wouldn't be easy, but James was determined to walk it with him every step of the way. The walls Elijah had built around himself were starting to come down, brick by brick, and James would be there to help him build something stronger in their place, something filled with hope, trust, and possibility. New beginnings and unseen battles. The next morning, Elijah woke up to the smell of bacon sizzling and coffee brewing. For a brief moment, he felt disoriented, his mind still half caught in the memories of cold park benches and restless nights. But the soft comfort of the guest room's bed and the warm glow filtering through the curtains quickly reminded him he was safe now. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The events of the past few days felt surreal, like a dream that might shatter at any moment. But it hadn't. Pulling on a fresh t-shirt and jeans James had laid out for him, Elijah made his way to the kitchen. James stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with a surprising level of skill for a man who probably had chefs on speed dial. "You cook?" Elijah asked, his tone skeptical. James glanced over his shoulder with a grin. "Don't look so surprised. I'm not completely useless outside a boardroom." Elijah smirked. "Could have fooled me." "Sit down," James said, plating the pancakes. "Breakfast is ready." As they ate, James sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "So, I was thinking," he began, "it might be time to start making some plans." Elijah paused mid-bite. "Plans?" "Yeah, like school for one." Elijah's expression darkened. "I don't need school. I'm doing fine without it." James set his mug down firmly. "Elijah, I get that you've had to grow up faster than most kids, but education is important. You're smart, and you've got talent. Don't throw that away." Elijah's jaw clenched. "School didn't care about me before. Why should I care about it now?" James leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Because it's not about the school. It's about you. I'm offering to help you build a future, but you've got to meet me halfway." Elijah stared at his plate, the battle between pride and fear playing out on his face. "Look," James said gently, "I'm not saying it'll be easy, but I'll be right there with you, every step of the way. Deal?" After a long pause, Elijah sighed. "Deal, I guess." James smiled. "Good. We'll start by looking into some art programs too. Sound fair?" Elijah's eyes lit up despite himself. "Yeah, that sounds cool." A visit to the past. Later that day, James decided it was time to dig deeper into Elijah's past. If he was going to help the boy build a better future, he needed to understand where he was coming from. "Elijah," James said as they got into the car, "I was thinking we could swing by your neighborhood. Maybe pick up some of your stuff." Elijah stiffened. "I don't have much left there. And my uncle, he's not exactly gonna roll out the welcome mat." "We'll handle it together," James assured him. The drive took them from the gleaming skyscrapers of downtown to a rundown neighborhood on the city's outskirts. The houses were cramped and weathered, with peeling paint and rusted fences. Kids played in the street, their laughter a stark contrast to the bleak surroundings. Elijah's fists clenched as they pulled up in front of a dilapidated house with a sagging porch. "This is it." James stepped out of the car, his sharp suit looking completely out of place. Elijah followed reluctantly, his shoulders tense. Before they could reach the front door, a burly man with a beer-stained t-shirt stumbled onto the porch. His bloodshot eyes narrowed when he saw Elijah. "Well, look who finally crawled back." The man sneered. "What, you come begging for more scraps?" James stepped forward, his voice cold and authoritative. "I'm James Prescott. Elijah's staying with me now." The man's gaze flicked to James's expensive watch and tailored suit. "Well, la dada. Got yourself a sugar daddy, huh, boy?" Elijah's face flushed with humiliation, but James didn't flinch. "We're just here to get his things," James said firmly. "We'll be gone in a minute." The man laughed bitterly. "Ain't nothing worth taking. Kid's got no future, just like his mama. Good riddance." James's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "Come on, Elijah. Let's get what you need." Inside, the house was cluttered and suffocating. Elijah led James to a small, dimly lit room with a mattress on the floor and a few scattered belongings. Elijah grabbed a worn sketchbook and a small photo frame. "This is it," he said quietly. James's heart ached at the sight. "You sure?" "Yeah," Elijah muttered. As they walked back to the car, James noticed the way Elijah's shoulders seemed lighter, as if leaving that house behind was a step toward freedom. The road ahead. That evening, back at the penthouse, Elijah sat on the couch, flipping through his sketchbook. James joined him, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Thanks," Elijah said quietly, taking a mug. You did good today, James said. That couldn't have been easy. Elijah shrugged. It's just, I'm tired of running, you know. James nodded. I get it, but you're not alone anymore. Elijah's grip tightened around the mug. I used to think nobody cared. But you're different. James smiled. Took me a while to learn that caring isn't a weakness. It's what makes us strong. Elijah looked thoughtful. Maybe I'll give this whole school thing a shot. See what happens. That's all I ask, James said warmly. As the city lights twinkled outside, James knew there were still challenges ahead. But tonight, they had won a small victory. And sometimes, that was enough. A future reimagined. The air was crisp as James and Elijah walked through the park, the same one where James had first found the boy sleeping on a cold bench. Now, the trees were in full bloom, their branches heavy with pink and white blossoms. Children laughed as they chased each other across the grass, and families spread blankets for picnics under the warm sun. Elijah glanced at the bench where his journey with James had begun. Feels weird being back here, he admitted. James nodded. Full circle, huh? Yeah, Elijah said softly. But it's different now. I'm different. You've come a long way, James agreed. Elijah smiled faintly. Thanks to you. James placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. You did the hard part, kid. I just gave you a little nudge. A big step forward. The following Monday, Elijah stood in front of the towering entrance to Riverside Academy, a prestigious private school known for its cutting-edge arts program. His stomach churned with nerves as he clutched his backpack strapped tightly. You ready? James asked, standing beside him. Not really, Elijah admitted. James chuckled. That's okay. Big changes are always a little scary. Elijah took a deep breath. I guess I'll find out if I belong here. You belong anywhere you decide to belong, James said firmly. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Elijah nodded, bolstered by James's confidence. As they walked through the gates, curious eyes followed them. James's tailored suit and commanding presence were hard to miss, but Elijah focused on the path ahead. The headmaster, a distinguished man with salt and pepper hair, greeted them warmly. Mr. Prescott, Elijah, welcome. We're honored to have you join us. Thanks, Elijah said, trying to keep his voice steady. You'll fit right in, the headmaster assured him. Our arts program is one of the best in the state. After a brief tour, James knelt slightly to meet Elijah's gaze. You got this, he said quietly. Elijah swallowed hard. You'll be here after school, right? Wouldn't miss it, James promised. With one last glance, Elijah squared his shoulders and walked into his new classroom. A turning point. As the weeks passed, Elijah found himself thriving in ways he never imagined. His art skills flourished under the guidance of passionate teachers who encouraged his creativity. He made friends, real friends who didn't judge him for where he came from but admired his talent and resilience. One afternoon, Elijah stood in front of an easel, his brush moving with practiced ease. The canvas came to life with bold strokes of color, depicting a vibrant cityscape filled with energy and possibility. His teacher, Mrs. Donahue, who had transferred to Riverside Academy after James pulled a few strings, beamed with pride. Elijah, this is incredible, she said. You've truly found your voice through art. Elijah grinned. Thanks, Mrs. D. As the final bell rang, Elijah packed up his supplies and headed outside, where James was waiting by the car. How was it? James asked as Elijah hopped in. Awesome, Elijah said. Mrs. D thinks I should enter the regional art competition. James's eyes lit up. That's amazing. You should do it. You really think I have a shot? Elijah asked hesitantly. I know you do, James said confidently. The art competition. The day of the regional art competition arrived, and Elijah stood nervously in front of his painting, which was now on display alongside dozens of other impressive pieces. The room buzzed with anticipation as judges moved from one artwork to the next, jotting down notes. James stood nearby, offering silent support. When the head judge finally approached Elijah's piece, she paused, her expression thoughtful. "This is remarkable," she said. "The energy, the story. It's captivating." Elijah's heart raced as she moved on. After what felt like an eternity, the winners were announced. In third place, Madison Lee. Polite applause filled the room. In second place, Carlos Rivera. Elijah's palms grew sweaty. And the first place winner is Elijah Taylor. The room erupted into cheers as Elijah stood frozen in shock. James clapped proudly, his smile wide. "You did it," James said, nudging Elijah forward. Elijah walked up to the podium, his legs trembling. As he accepted the award, he glanced at James, who nodded encouragingly. "This is for everyone who ever felt like they didn't matter," Elijah said, his voice steady. "Because we all do." A new chapter. That evening, back at the penthouse, Elijah placed the trophy on the mantel. "You earned that," James said, handing him a soda. Elijah took a sip, grinning. "Feels pretty good." "You're just getting started," James said. "The world's wide open for you now." Elijah's expression grew serious. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, James. You gave me a chance when nobody else would." James's voice softened. "You reminded me what really matters, Elijah. Life's not about boardrooms and bank accounts. It's about the people we lift up along the way." Elijah nodded thoughtfully. "So what's next?" James smiled. "Whatever you want, kid. The future's yours to paint." As they sat together, the city lights shimmering beyond the windows, both of them knew that this was more than just a story of redemption. It was a story of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between two unlikely friends who had found family in each other. And it was only the beginning. Giving back. Months had passed since Elijah's victory at the art competition. His name was beginning to gain attention in the local art scene, with gallery owners showing interest in his work. But what amazed James more than Elijah's growing success was the young man's desire to give back. One Saturday morning, Elijah stood in the living room, nervously holding a flyer in his hands. The words "Urban Youth Art Workshop," presented by Elijah Taylor, were printed boldly across the top. "You sure about this?" James asked, leaning against the couch with a smile. Elijah nodded firmly. "I remember what it felt like. Being invisible, thinking nobody cared. If I can help one kid see they're worth something, it's all worth it." James's heart swelled with pride. "I'm proud of you, Elijah. This is big." Elijah grinned sheepishly. "Thanks, but I'm gonna need your help." James raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you want me to be your assistant?" "More like the guy who handles all the boring paperwork and makes sure we have snacks," Elijah joked. James laughed. "Fair enough. Count me in." The workshop begins. The community center was bustling with activity as kids of all ages filed in, their eyes wide with curiosity. The walls were lined with canvases, paints, and sketch pads, ready for eager hands. Elijah stood at the front, his confidence growing with every passing minute. "Welcome, everyone," he said, his voice strong. "Today isn't just about painting pretty pictures. It's about telling your story. Because your story matters, and art is a way to share it with the world." The kids listened intently, their faces lighting up with excitement. As they began working on their projects, Elijah moved through the room, offering guidance and encouragement. One young girl, no older than 10, struggled with her brushstrokes. "I can't do it right," she said, frustration evident in her voice. Elijah knelt beside her. "Hey, art's not about being perfect. It's about expressing yourself. Let's try this. What are you feeling right now?" The girl thought for a moment. "Happy, but kinda nervous too." "Perfect," Elijah said. "Use those feelings. Paint them." Slowly, the girl's frown melted into a smile as she let her emotions guide her brush. A surprise visitor. Later that afternoon, as the workshop was winding down, a familiar figure walked through the doors. "Mrs. Donahue," Elijah exclaimed, surprised. The former teacher beamed. "I wouldn't miss this for the world. Look at you, Elijah. Changing lives, just like I knew you would." Elijah's throat tightened. "You believed in me when no one else did. I'll never forget that. And now you're passing it on," she said proudly. James watched the exchange from across the room, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what it was all about, making a difference, one life at a time. A vision for the future. That evening, back at the penthouse, Elijah and James sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below. "I've been thinking," Elijah said, his voice thoughtful. "What if we made this workshop a regular thing? Maybe even open a whole center for kids who need a safe space to create." James's eyes lit up. "That's a fantastic idea. We could get sponsors, bring in more artists, maybe even offer scholarships." Elijah grinned. "Yeah, and it'll be a place where no kid ever feels invisible." James raised his glass. "To the future." Elijah clinked his soda can against James's glass. "To making it brighter for everyone." Epilogue. The power of one act. Years later, the Elijah Taylor Center for Creative Arts stood as a beacon of hope in the city. Hundreds of young artists had passed through its doors, finding not just their creative voices, but a sense of belonging. At the grand opening of the new wing, Elijah stood before a crowd, now a confident and celebrated artist. "This all started because one person decided to care," he said, glancing at James, who stood proudly in the front row. "And that changed everything." The crowd erupted into applause as James wiped a tear from his eye. Because sometimes, all it took was one act of kindness to change a life, and that life could go on to change the world.